Hello, everyone. My name is Alan Dick, and on behalf of my fellow CommerceNext co-founders Scott Silverman and Veronica Sontsev, I want to welcome you to today's webinar. Today is Wednesday, July 8th, 2020, and our topic this week is the case for customer lifetime value-based advertising. Before we go any further, I'd like to welcome our guest speakers and panelists. First off, Tracy Inglis. She's a former president and CMO at RTW Retail Wins and Textile Fashion Group. Leander Blumenthal, account executive at Google. Faiz Ahmad, global product lead search at Google. Andreas Reifen, founder and CEO at Crealytics. And Irene Kögl, the head of global digital marketing at Crealytics. Thanks to our speakers and to you, our audience, for joining us today. So let's get started by taking a look at today's agenda. We're going to take a look at some upcoming CommerceNext events. Going to go over some housekeeping notes to help make certain that everyone's getting the most out of this they can. We're going to take a look at how Land's End used CLTV to their benefit. We're going to ask the audience some polls, and then we're going to bring on our panel for some discussion and some audience Q&A. First off, I want to tell you a little bit about the CommerceNext Virtual Summit coming up on July 28th and 29th. The theme is Path to Recovery, and we've got a whole host of great speakers. We've got Gail Tifford, the Chief Brand Officer at Weight Watchers, Nate Checketts from Roan, Sucharita Kodali from Forrester, Charlie Cole from FDD, and so on. We have got some dynamite speakers, more than 40 in total, and we've got a lot of great topics. We're going to be looking at the new normal in retail and e-commerce. We're going to talk about the post-pandemic consumer, how to handle marketing and merchandising strategies for recessionary times. We're going to look at how you can market on half the budget and what the stores are going to look like in a post-COVID environment. And we're going to be hearing from some great brands, as you can see on the right. Our regular webinar series will cease for a couple of weeks while we get ready for the virtual summit, but the next weekly webinar will be on Wednesday, August 12th at 2 p.m. Eastern, and it will be from our friends at Attentive, and they're going to be asking the question why 2020 is actually the year of mobile. So, on to some housekeeping notes. Don't worry about missing anything. We're recording this webinar, and we'll make it available for replay later tomorrow afternoon. But I want to take a moment to show you where things are on your screen first. Let me draw your attention to the upper right-hand corner of your screen, where you'll see Q&A, polls, and handouts. If you've got a question you'd like to ask our speakers, and we wholeheartedly encourage you to do that, you can fill it in the Q&A box below. If you see a question you like and you're really interested in having that question answered, upvote it. That gives us an indication of what the audience wants to hear. This is how you can help participate. We have handouts. The slide deck is available. Crealytics has a couple of documents in there for you. Feel free to download those at any time. And if you're watching this on the recording, just click on the document icon to receive any of the handouts, slides, or a PDF of the poll results. And with that out of the way, I'm going to turn it over to Irene and Leander. Folks, the floor is yours. If you will turn on your microphones, we'll be good to go.
Thanks, Alan, for the handover. Excited to share about the Land's End and how to leverage first-party data to boost revenue by 60%, and excited to share about data activation in general. I'll be handing it over to Irene in a moment to present the case. First, what we wanted to share with you is a recent study that BCG and Google did jointly, and they defined the digital marketing maturity framework that supports companies to assess where they are in their digital marketing maturity journey, and also to see what one can do to advance themselves. In this study, we see 4 different stages, and the most interesting part about that is that the most mature companies actually have a significant higher return on invest from their marketing compared to the less advanced. What we can see is that even though this is apparent, and 90% of respondents in a study said that they view activating data as very important, but despite that, only 30% are actually doing so, and only 1% are doing so in a fully cross-channel customer experience for their customers. So there's plenty of room for companies to actually leverage that. And I want to point out that when we say first-party data or data in that sense, what we really mean is activating business intelligence. And what we can see is that it's really worth it. And the most efficient players, they deliver more relevant experiences for their customers, and that leads up to 2.x incremental revenue from a single ad. So it can really improve revenue, top line, but also efficiency of their marketing operations. I want to walk through a project and a use case of data activation in order to get more new customers. And many of our retail clients are actually asking themselves questions like, how can I get more new customers? I want to grow my new to file. And what they have in common is that they value a sale from a new customer very differently from an existing one. Yet when they're optimizing and bidding to digital marketing channels, many are not really optimizing for that and are agnostic to the customer types. And in this sample project, I want to show kind of how data activation can get more new customers. And this shows how it works. And what's important here to point out is that right here, we are optimizing to new customers. But we could use that technology as well as for different KPIs, such as lifetime value, profits, or other things. And our technology uses a system called conversion import to inform our systems on the different value a customer type has for a retailer. And there are plenty of ways that we can activate that. We can use Google Ad or enterprise tools to do so. And in this sample case, it's about new customer acquisition. And it becomes especially effective when we pair this with our smart bidding and audience solutions, because they use advanced machine learning and leverage a rich set of auction time signals. With that said, a sample project like this there's some work that to be done. And this overview shows actually how many different teams, roles, and functions and departments are needed for a data activation project like this. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Irene from Crealytics. We partnered with Crealytics and Lansand for exactly such a project. And Irene will present this project and the phenomenal results of this brand new case study.
Thanks, Leander, also for providing the wider context in which the case study with Lansand actually happened. So Lansand is a very well-known name in the fashion world. It's a leading multi-channel retailer of casual fashion and home products, acting globally. And they approached both Google and us with the idea to partner for a project that was aimed to increase new customer revenues while keeping the efficiency between the test and control campaign at a stable and comparable level. So the idea was to increase the acquisition and the revenues of these customers that were supposed to be acquired. What we then came up with was a strategy that values new customers differently compared to existing ones. And the idea was to use this different values in order to prioritize the marketing decisions accordingly and funnel the budgets into the right way. The method that we used in order to make this happen was importing attributed new customer data through a conversion upload and make this data actionable via Google's machine learning bidding solution. And we decided to use target drawers in this particular case. The test setup was making use of the one-click experiment framework that Google provides. And we aimed for impression opportunity split of 75% for the control campaign and 25% for the test in this particular case. The results that we achieved with this test were really phenomenal and pretty much blow us away. We managed to achieve 43% new customers in comparison to the previous method. And we also managed to achieve a plus 60% in revenue while keeping the return on ad spend at a comparable level than within the control campaign. We also observed some very interesting facts, because the main interest here was to find out how much you can push the Google TROS algorithm to work on different data points and therefore influence its behavior. And it did exactly what we hoped it would do. It really focused on new customer acquisition. It drove a significant plus in terms of volume, and the results were really, really strong. It also is a first step into a direction where the client wants to continue to optimize now the input that we are pushing into the system. So together with us in Google, we take this as a first step, and we took also the insights that we generated out of this test in order to identify certain levers where we could potentially also optimize the results on the longer run. So optimizing for a higher yield in rebuy rates and optimizing for lifetime value are one of the things that we want to approach in the future. Having said this, this test was so successful that this is now the state of the art, how the client is operating and managing their paid search campaigns. And it was a really compelling case. And concluding with this, I will hand over back to Alan. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Leander and Irene. Really appreciate you taking a couple of minutes to go over that case study. I'd like to now head over to the polls, as it were. It's now the audience's turn. We've got some questions we'd like to ask you, but before we do, just like to go over the housekeeping again for the folks that are coming in a little bit later. Just a reminder that in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, you can see the Q&A, polls, and handouts buttons. You can ask a question of our speakers in the Q&A field below. If you click over to the polls, you can see when they'll pop up automatically on your screen. If you want to see what the results were, you can take a look by going over to the close section. And finally, if you're taking a look at this on a recording after the webinar is complete, all you need to do is click on the document icon at the bottom of your viewer, and the handouts and slides and poll results will all be there for you. So with that, let us begin the polling. Question number 1. What is the most important performance marketing metric your company is currently using? Is it customer acquisition cost, return on ad spend, revenue, customer lifetime value, incremental revenue, or something else? And if it is something else, feel free to share that metric in the Q&A section. Always like to hear from you. How has your advertising return on investment been impacted by the pandemic? Is it significantly better, somewhat better, about the same, somewhat worse, or significantly worse? Are the new customers acquired during COVID similar to your existing pre-COVID customers? The answers are yes, they are similar to existing customers. No, they're different. Or 3, we haven't analyzed the new customer cohort. What we're going to do now is I'm going to invite our panel to join us. So let's do this. Faiz, do you want to introduce yourself? And then Andreas, I'll have you introduce yourself. Tell us what you do, what companies you're from, etc.
Yeah, that sounds great. I can go first if that's okay. My name's Faiz. I am a GPL, which is a global product lead at Google on search audiences specifically. The best way to think about my job at Google is I bring the market to the product. So speak a lot with advertisers on a daily basis. Also, just people who work with ads every single day and try to take that feedback back to product to try to build new solutions, as well as just try to make a marketer's job much easier.
Okay.
And my name is Andreas. I'm founder and CEO of Crealytics. We are around since 2008, and We are focused on performance advertising purely for retailers. And essentially what we are doing is our topic today. We help larger e-commerce players to transition from old KPI sets like ROAS more towards customer lifetime value. So I'm supporting these guys in managing the transition and actually being more effective in spending ad dollars.
I'm going to move over to Andreas for a second. I want to ask you kind of a top-down question here. I want to think about this kind of from the macro sense. So we're starting to see that many companies are, or investors are starting to look at a customer value-based valuation for companies. We've seen that in recent years. One of the examples that comes to mind is in 2017, Daniel McCarthy and Peter Fader did an analysis of Wayfair, and they were saying that they were spending too much money on acquiring customers, and this was causing an overvaluation. And so what we would, I'd like some of your thoughts and comments on that. Why do you think investors are starting to look at potential value of their customers versus their top line revenue?
So if we take a look at the early stage of e-commerce, what companies mostly did in order to drive company value was invest heavy in advertising, scale revenues, and while not being profitable, still getting very decent valuations. Today, as the space has gotten much tighter, we have adopted a new approach to valuing companies. And actually, this is, if we compare it to the old world where we just took a look at top line revenue growth and didn't actually take a look into the future, the new approach is looking at the individual customers and try to predict what an individual customer will do in the future in terms of repeat purchases and revenues the specific person will generate. So if you sum that all up in a bottom-up way, you kind of come to the long-term value of a company. So it's no longer helpful to throw money at marketing and grow top-line revenue if this is not sustainable. So the new rules of the game are basically try to acquire the most loyal customers, the ones who will make repeat purchases over time, and drive the valuation that way. So instead of simply generating revenue, we're trying to find the good customers, new customers, which will be loyal to the company. And this is, of course, something which has a much higher future value than just the folks who buy once and never come back.
Excellent, excellent. Faiz, any thoughts on that, or do you want to kind of start diving in and start talking about how Google's bidding technology reacts to existing customers? You can tag on the first question, or you can start with a second.
Yeah, sounds great. To Andreas's point, this is sort of the new way to think about your business and how you value your customers over time. And at Google, this is something that we're really thinking about deeply in terms of how to make these actions and these insights that you're getting from the data and the users that you're capturing more insightful to go after more longer term value customers. And there's really two ways of thinking about this. And different marketers have different philosophies on it. But one of them is through historical lifetime value, which is looking at the past 12 to 18 months of your conversion history, whether it be through the campaigns that you're running today, seeing who's converted, understanding what those attributes are, or somebody who's high LTV. And then the other piece of that is what Andreas referred to as predictive lifetime value, which is before a user even makes that first purchase on your site, how do we know what their attributes are and what their likelihood to spend more with you is? And I think this is particularly relevant for e-commerce and retail clients today. And this is something at Google, we're really thinking deeply about. To your point about Google's bidding system and how that works over time, this is something that is continuously being optimized towards based off of the signals and the conversions that we've historically seen in your account. And this would be the same case for if you're using a different platform like Facebook, for example, even where they're taking a look at all the people who've converted historically, And as a result, our smart bidding system is reacting in near real time to users' behavior, those consumer trends, and trying to optimize towards that lifetime value. But where we really see the best combination and people really getting the most out of this is where they're able to take the insights that they have from their business and the insights that they have from their first party data and being able to translate back into the ad campaigns that they're running to be very smart and predictive around the lifetime value of their users. That to us is the holy grail, and that's really what we want to get to from a product perspective in the near term and in the future.
Cool. I think we have Tracy on. Are you there?
Yes, I am.
Outstanding. All right. So at the top of this, I asked Andreas some thoughts on why customer value-based corporate valuation was becoming more prominent. And I mentioned the Wayfair example when McCarthy and Fader issued a paper saying Wayfair was spending too much money on their customer acquisition, and that it had a direct impact on their stock price for a while. I wanted to get your thoughts, given your vast depth of your experience. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that valuing customers is going to become increasingly more important for companies to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, looking at some of the ways that retailers in particular have been valued over the years, some of them are very archaic. I mean, some of them were really only looking at top line and not even taking profitability into account. And so when we look at predictive lifetime value coupled with an ongoing understanding of the volume of your customer acquisition each month, that is a very powerful combination in predicting what your future revenues and what your future margin, importantly, is going to be for a company. And so when you think of a lot of the subscription-based fashion brands like I've worked for in the past have done really a great job at understanding the importance of measuring lifetime value, predicting lifetime value, adjusting your media spend based on, going after different high LTV groups of customers, and then also keeping a keen eye on your customer acquisition costs. Your customer acquisition costs don't have to be low if you have a really high LTV. So it's really just the relationship between your customer acquisition cost and your lifetime value that's important, and making sure that you are more than covering the cost of acquiring those customers in the margin that they're going to bring to you over their lifetime.
I see. Yeah, I completely agree. Did you find, so let's dig in a little bit here. So what happens when a company's goals are off? I mean, let's say that you have an opinion that customer lifetime value and kind of really moving away from a product-based analysis of your marketing spend over to a customer-based. Do you find that that there's trouble getting the company aligned behind that? Do you find what has to happen to have that alignment take place? What happens when it's not aligned? I kind of want to dig into your experience with this.
Yeah, I think it's a relatively new concept for most retailers today. And a lot of retailers have been doing the same thing in the same way for decades and decades. And so change is hard. So what I have found to be most effective is start with the finance team. If you can, do a retroactive evaluation of using lifetime value and customer acquisition count. Can you predict the future revenue, and then compare that to what the finance team did to project future revenues using their traditional methodology? And I guarantee you, using LTV and customer acquisition volume is actually going to be a much more effective way of predicting future total revenue and total margin for the company. And so once you get their attention by doing that, then they'll start to make LTV and customer acquisition cost critical KPIs to track. A lot of retailers make the mistake of making LTV a marketing KPI. It's a marketing problem. Marketing needs to track it. Marketing needs to be measured by it. The whole organization needs to be paying attention to not only the volume of customers that you acquire every month, but also the lifetime value of those customers. this is something that not just the finance team, but also the merchandising team should be living and breathing. At Textile Fashion Group, the merch team is really good about understanding the projected future revenue and therefore the necessary inventory investment for the future based on how many customers you've acquired and what you're predicting they're going to spend with you in the future. That creates less waste. It makes a more efficient buy. It makes your turns better. So it's really critical that the marketing team can collect the data, but really show both finance and merchandising and the rest of the organization how to use it.
It's interesting. I got about a bunch of different questions that came up in that, but I want to give Andreas a chance to chime in if you have anything, or Faiz, if you have anything that you want to add to that before I start drilling in a little bit further. Andreas, we'll start with you.
I mean, I can underline what Tracy just mentioned regarding the starting point finance. What we usually see is that finance does the budgeting, and they, of course, tie the budgeting into certain efficiency KPIs. And usually that's traditionally a ROAS target marketing would then get. So what marketing does, they simply try to chase down as much revenue as they can given a specific budget they were granted. And if you do this, you will perform best if you simply chase down the cheapest revenue you can find. Means you tend to sell products at low margins with high return rates to existing customers because that's the cheapest revenue you can get. What you will never do is sacrifice short-term revenue and trade it for rather long-term revenue. And this is a very short-sighted approach. So what then finance does, they see beyond just revenue. They see profitability in the back end. They see return. They see new customer acquisition. So they then analyze the numbers and they come to the conclusion that they had expected a different profitability. So they tighten the ROAS target. What they oftentimes don't know is that the target itself was the reason why it all failed. Because if you tell somebody, bring me as much revenue as you can, and you incentivize people based on revenue, of course, you get what you were asking for. And so I think the target itself is already the starting point of something which goes entirely wrong. And marketing can actually target new customers, and not only new customers in general. We are now capable of acquiring the best customers which will do repeat purchases. And that's the sort of education which needs to happen between marketing and finance. And this is sometimes a very lengthy process, and the whole CLV topic in marketing is less a tech challenge than an organizational transformation challenge, in my opinion.
That's awesome. Thank you, guys. We're starting to get some really interesting questions coming in. So I want to hit some of these. Tracy Herman's asked, are customer acquisition costs lowered as the volume of new customers increased when we marked down our site during lockdown as a way to clear inventory? I'm not clear how to best model LTV based on these new set of discount customers, and I'm curious what models you would recommend. And Tracy, I'll start with you. If you let me to reread the question, I'll be happy to do it.
I think it makes sense. What I would do is I would go back and look through your historical last 12-month customer base and find people who were entered into the brand and frequently purchase as discount or clearance customers. And then you can look at what their LTV looks like and imitate that and use that as your lookalike for the LTV trend of these new customers. Something I've done in the past at different retailers is calculate an MMU percentage based on each individual in our database. So what is their discount propensity, essentially? And so then you can use those customers and create a segment of customers who are discount oriented, who always need a discount to shop, and separate them from the people who will pay full price, especially for like new arrivals and things like that. And you can treat them differently in your marketing. And another benefit of doing that is that you can understand what their LTV is. So when you do have future clearance sales and you have future, periods of time where you're getting discount customers in the door, you know what the profile of that customer looks like and can feed that into your understanding of their predictive LTV.
Pretty good answer.
Yeah, just to add on that, I think Tracy hit the nail right on the head there in terms of how do you actually activate towards LTV once you've already know that somebody's really high lifetime value, in this case, discount shoppers. And the best way, again, is, you're already capturing their email address. You're already capturing the certain attributes like their phone number. And the best way to do this, at least from a Google perspective, is through customer match, where you're able to take all that information that you've captured, re-upload it into your campaigns, and really try to activate towards them. And one of the best ways is through the lookalike audiences that we're able to generate for you, where you already have your list uploaded, but on top of that, you're also going after new acquisition or new users that match similar attributes to people who are really high LTV for you. So it's kind of two ways of approaching it. One is, you're going after people you've already acquired. You want to go and try to get more retention out of them in terms of more purchases. And the other piece of that is more so new user acquisition. It's how do we go about finding more high LTV users that have never visited our site before, who have never heard of our brand before. And I think having those two in parallel, running in both your marketing campaigns, makes for a very powerful combination.
Mm-hmm. Andreas, any thoughts?
Yeah, so I feel we have an unsolved problem here as well, because when it comes to retention, there could be two philosophies. You could simply target your best customers, the ones who frequently purchase and buy from you. And if you do this, you will see a phenomenal performance. The question is, should you maybe rather target the former high-value customers, the ones who have stopped buying from you? If you do this, some will still churn, so your performance won't look as great, but eventually your incremental revenue is much better and you generate. So on the retention side, I feel this is still a problem nobody has really finally ultimately solved. On the acquisition side, we essentially have two mechanisms. So the one which was already outlined is you tag your most valuable customers, and then you can run lookalikes and target similar people. But there's another mechanism which is highly effective, which is simply, everybody knows bidding tools work on monetary values. So you can also track the new customer acquisition. So each new customer who makes a purchase, you can qualify and you can predict the value of these customers. And if you hand this value back to the bidding will see that in certain areas of your campaigns, it could be based upon geographies, it could be specific brands or product categories or combinations of those, will have a higher value. So the bidding tools, AI, will see this and start reallocating budget from areas where you mostly target existing customers, sell low margin products, and it will shift the money towards where you actually really generate value. The difficulty is, if you want to use this approach in conjunction with customer lifetime value, you have to deal with very scarce data. You generate one purchase, and at that point, once the purchase is done, you need to predict what this specific customer will do in the future. And there are good ways of doing that. So you can at least put them into three buckets: not so good, medium, and very good customers. How do you do this? Essentially, you look for people from similar geographies who have made similar purchases, similar basket composition, similar basket size, and this is what you then use for the prediction, and you put it right back into the bidding tag so it can act upon it instead of just seeing revenue. In the end, these bidding technologies don't really understand what this, whether you target a new customer or an existing one, they just react upon value. This is what you have to put back. So it's all about measuring the impact of your transactions and then let the AI do the rest of the job.
Cool. Tracy, any thoughts on retention when you're targeting customers and you're thinking about it from a CLTV point of view?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, a few things. I think you definitely don't want to spend money serving an ad to someone who was going to convert anyway, unless you are somehow increasing their spend. Otherwise, it just doesn't really make sense. So, the question is, how do you find the people who weren't going to shop and serve, marketing to them specifically? It's the age-old question that was asked back when email marketing didn't exist and digital media didn't exist, and we were building models for direct mail. So I think the important thing is to look at incremental gross margin ROI. This is far superior to the blunt tool of looking at ROAS alone. So if you understand the incremental impact of gross margin, that means you hold a control group so that you have a similar looking behavior group and you understand where you get the most incremental gain on your marketing spend. So that being said, groups that you would probably find an incremental gain on are things like people who are off cycle on their shopping purchase. So if you know that people shop your brand once a month, or you have a group of customers who shop once a month or once every 3 months, and you know their shopping patterns, if you find those people when they're off of their shopping pattern, so they haven't shopped in 3 months, they're lapsed as individuals, and you can target those people specifically. Another way to look at it is knowing where they are in their lifetime value journey with you. So if you know on average that you get about $300 of gross margin from your customers in their lifetime, and you have a customer who has only spent $30 of gross margin with you, you know that she's at the beginning of her journey with you as a customer, as opposed to someone who is at 290 out of 300. Who would you rather spend the investment to go after? You're going to get more incremental revenue by going after the person who's at the beginning of their LTV journey.
No, I do think that, Tracy did really hit a good point in terms of understanding the incremental revenue that you're getting from your users. And I think, understanding that user journey through the marketing insights that you have through your platforms today is absolutely critical to see where they are. Are they at the beginning of their purchase funnel? Or are they towards the end? And, if we're able to use the insights that we have in terms of understanding, the profile of who the user we want to go after is, and what actually constitutes somebody who will spend more money with you historically, that incremental piece becomes infinitely more important to understanding how much revenue you'll get over time. And, to Andreas's point that we mentioned earlier, that also helps unify that story internally with your finance team to really understand what the long-term impact of having that user go through that journey and that funnel is. And I think that really is the most important piece here.
Mm-hmm. Tracy, you mentioned, I want to go to one of the audience questions here from Joe. He was asking about how does brand awareness factor into it, and you touched on that. The specific question was, how does brand awareness factor into CLTV-based advertising, and how does it impact ROAS-based advertising? I mean, brand is critical.
Yeah, absolutely. Brand awareness in and of itself as a KPI is fairly anemic. But at the same time, without brand awareness, you won't even have sales because it's the beginning of the funnel. It's the top of the process. And so I think it works in a couple of different ways into the LTV-based marketing. And first is, from an acquisition standpoint. So if people have never heard of you, they never have an opportunity to have a lifetime value with you. So brand awareness from that standpoint is critical, but you need to realize that not everyone is similar. So, you'd much rather have a fewer amount of people be aware of you, but many more of the people in your eligible pool of customers be aware of you. So that's what I mean when I say brand awareness in and of itself is anemic. If you have a substantial amount of men, for example, who are aware of a women's fashion brand, that does you no good, or does you very little good. If you are more aware in your core audience, that's really what you're trying to focus on from an acquisition standpoint. And then from a retention standpoint, brand awareness can be helpful in that it's a reminder. So when I talk about that LTV and the shopping cycles, you can have someone cycle through an LTV and then kickstart and get back into the brand. Anyone who's lapsed, you can restart the cycle by having another touch point where you remind the customer, I'm here, you love me, come shop me again. So, brand awareness we often think of as an acquisition play, but it can also be a retention play as well. It just has to be coupled with understanding that full funnel, the economics of it, and making sure you're getting the awareness from the right customers.
Andreas, what's the Crealytics point of view on this? You work with so many different clients, and many of them have very established brands. You certainly have got to have some thoughts on this.
Well, first of all, we are fully focused on performance advertising, so we don't really work on the branding side. However, I do believe that ultimately it's about being able to also measure the impact, and through, for example, incrementality testing, we can get a decent understanding of what, for example, upper funnel programmatic brings to the table, what the impact ultimately is. So if you work on a last click basis, of course, then you have to label everything which isn't search and retargeting as branding. If you have a solid attribution model in place, and if you couple it with incrementality testing, there's a very good opportunity to also make upper funnel activity work from a performance basis. So I think while we make progress in the industry, many activities which have formerly been labeled as simply branding, which was kind of an excuse for not showing performance, will be able to work in a full performance setup, in my opinion.
Cool. All right. So before I get to the dreaded "how did COVID change everything, or did it?" question, which we ask pretty much in every webinar, I'm going to take the last of the Q&A questions that we've got from our audience. And I'll remind the audience, feel free to ask the questions. I'm more than happy to let you guys participate in this. If you've got a question, feel free to ask it now. And this is from Janet Rush. And again, I think we touched on this, but I want to make certain I give it a full viewing here. Her question is, should you only target high LTV customers, or are there ways to target lower LTV customers at a lower cost? Andreas?
Yeah, so clearly it's not a 0-1 game. Ultimately, it's what Tracy already mentioned. It's about the customer acquisition cost related to the customer lifetime value. And if we target customers which have a lower high customer lifetime value, in that case, we have to decrease or make sure that our acquisition costs are in line with that lower value. And predictive customer lifetime value allows us to actually do this. So instead of working with one customer acquisition cost target across the board, we would have different customer acquisition costs per individual customer. So ultimately, it's just a matter of how much money am I willing to pay to get someone to buy from me. And so it's definitely worth also targeting less valuable customers if you spend less money. And that's ultimately what we do.
I think the coolest bidding system, and I haven't seen this, and maybe Fives can build it for us, and maybe he's currently building it for us, but I think the coolest bidding system would be to say, I want to put a percentage margin increase, or percentage markup, I should say, increase based on the relationship between predictive lifetime value and customer acquisition costs. So, if you say I want that to be 20% of predictive LTV, and we see that we're predicting a particular target customer will spend $100 with us, then we're willing to pay up to $20 to acquire them. And if it goes to $200 lifetime value that we see, we're willing to pay $40 to acquire them. So really setting it up as a percentage target so that you can have individual target bidding CPAs based on the expected LTV. I think that would be really cool.
Awesome.
Yeah, Tracy, if I can chime
feedback
in here
heard, Tracy,
quickly.
on that.
Yeah, we'll start with Andreas and go to
yeah,
Faz.
so
yeah,
in my opinion, this is something which is already possible today. If we do full data activation, means if we assess the value of a new customer at the point of time when this new customer buys, it might be that customer one is qualified as a high value customer, so gets, let's say, $100, and the second one is qualified as less valuable and gets just $20. And if you then work on a ROI target, the bidding over time will spend less money on the lower value customers. So we can already simulate this to a certain extent. The question is still how effective and how advanced is AI to do this on a very granular level, and to what extent do we need to group these customers? But I think we are already going to some extent into this direction.
Faiz, I want to kick in there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, this is something that we're definitely thinking a lot about in terms of making our bidding systems more smart, where, one of the biggest concerns with automated bidding and the direction that things are going is that users just don't have enough control over how that bidding system works and how it reacts to their customer base. Because at the end of the day, the business knows who their customer is, and they want to be able to go after those high LTV users in any way they can. So informing the model, informing the system to move into the high LTV bucket and acquire more users at that cost is something that we're deeply thinking about. And also to the point of around, how does LTV sort of factor into all this, and should we be going after medium or low value customers or LTV customers as well? I think there's also potential for upsell between those buckets as well. So let's say you acquire somebody who is a medium to low value customer at a much cheaper acquisition cost. There is also potential to get more money from them down the road and have them become high LTV if we're able to show them the right ad at the right time, and showing them something very custom, for example, whether it be a very custom ad creative as well as a very custom landing page. So I think having all those pieces sort of built together to really try to go after somebody who is, very focused on that, is sort of the magic in terms of moving people through the different buckets and continuously getting more ROI out of them over time.
Outstanding. Well, I have you, Jeff Gerskell, from our friends over at B&H Photo Video. Jeff, glad to have you on with us today. Appreciate you joining us. He has a question: how do you activate CLTV as an objective within Google's automated bidding system? And people are definitely interested in hearing that answer. So, Faiz, I'll let you handle that one.
Yeah, so as of today, the best way to do this is through your customer match audience list that you have available. If you're able to segment your customer match list to people who are high LTV, whether that be looking at their ROAS, whether that be looking at how much that particular user that you've captured has spent over time, you could take that list, take it back into Google Ads today, create a very custom segmented list based off of that. And then as a result, you'll see a similar audience list that's available based on the customer match list. So this goes after both the retention scenario as well as the new user acquisition or prospecting scenario. That's the way you activate it on today. And over time, if you apply that list to a campaign that's using automated bidding, the automated bidding system will take that list into account, and then as a result, optimize towards it over time. And the more historical conversions that you have in your account, that's what's really going to feed the automation system to try to optimize towards those more high LTV users that you have.
Perfect. Andreas, this is up your alley. What are your thoughts on that?
Essentially, the art and science is to assess the value of each click on an advertisement and putting this specific value back into the bidding so that it sees these values on a granular level and can make effective decisions ultimately. So there are several steps when we do this. The first is always we have to assess the precise order value. So what's contained in an order, what's the net sales price, what is cost of goods sold, what are order-related costs like shipping, packaging, processing costs, warehouse costs, and so on. And we then see when returns come in over time. So all this has to be communicated back to the bidding. So this is order value assessment. The second piece is then what do we expect from newly acquired customers over time? And then we usually qualify them and put them in 3 buckets. This adds to the order value. And ultimately, the question is how incremental was that sale? And if it was just a retargeting click, for example, lowest funnel retargeting, doesn't matter. It could be someone having purchased for $1,000, but this person would probably have bought anyway without seeing an ad. So in this case, this value has to be decreased to communicate back to the bidding that there was little value. So ultimately, these lower funnel audiences will receive less budget, less advertising pressure, and we free up budget for other areas.
Awesome. Hey, while I have you, we got another question, and we're getting a lot of them, and we do appreciate it. This is from Zishan Rahim, and I apologize if I didn't get that name right. He's asking, can you offer some insight on what data activation looks like for novice advertisers? Andreas, this seems to be a good one for you to start with.
I didn't understand the last word. For what kind of advertiser?
He was saying novice or new advertisers. Maybe this might be better directed to Google, but I'll let you try that. It's can you offer some insight on what data activation looks like for novice advertisers? Basically, maybe define it.
It's essentially the process I just described. So ultimately, I think the most important thing is be able to track certain data points, and we have to look beyond just revenue. We need to get a sense of what the actual order margin was. And if you operate in fashion, you might sell shoes which have a return rate of 70% and maybe t-shirts with a return rate of only 10%. So this is a totally different story. So you have to reflect this when you track your campaign. So ultimately, what you want to see in your performance numbers is margin after returns. And in addition, you need to at least track whether an order was done by a new customer or an existing one. And to get started, there's a very pragmatic approach. You can just treat every new customer the same for this as a start and add a certain, let's call it, new customer value. So in this case, the bidding will be a bit more aggressive, where you acquire lots of new customers because the value is higher, and it then just operates on a ROI target with an increased transaction value. And once you're at this point, I think then you can further refine this. It's a little bit more complicated to activate attributed data, but it's also possible. And as a next step, you can then do predictive CLV. But I would recommend to start tracking the exact order margin and at least have a flag new or existing customer to get started. And then on the way, you can refine it.
Cool. We've got about 3 more minutes, and there's 2 more questions I want to get in, and I want to start with Tracy. Kevin Reyes is asking, has anyone on the panel seen success with customer development? For example, taking a low LTV cohort and converting it into a medium or even high LTV cohort. If you have, what tactics have been successful? Tracy, I think we'll open this one to you.
Sure. Yes, we have. I have seen that in my past. We've done a significant amount of cohort testing, both on high-performing cohorts as well as low-performing cohorts. And a couple of things that have really moved the needle. One is, in a broad bucket to say personalization. And a lot of people will think personalization means, putting email content a product that's relevant to me, or sorting a web page based on the products I want to see. It's actually much bigger than that. So, talking about having fewer marketing touch points. So instead of blasting everyone with an email 2-3 times a day, sending them 3 emails a week, but having more relevant touch points. So this gets into relevant promotions versus clearance, and it's a change in the broader organization as well as the marketing team. So rather than saying we want to have a big clearance sale at the end of the season to mark down everything that didn't sell, we can look at pockets of customers and say, hey, we bought too many, size large. And so we find the size large customers and send them a sale specifically. Everything is on sale, 50% off. So they go in and shop and buy those things that were excess inventory because it's relevant for them. Or, we have too many white shoes. So we go and we find the people who are most likely to buy white shoes, and we tell them everything you want to buy today, regardless of what it is 25% off. So those types of relevant promotions that seem to an individual to be very highly relevant, but to the broader group weren't something that was a necessarily product that moved, is super effective and a new way of thinking about personalization. And then the other thing outside of personalization is what I call demand-based buying. And so really, rather than paying attention to the trends that are going on outside of your customer base and making your buys according to that. So in fashion, that means watching the runways and then saying, oh, polka dots are trending, I better go buy a bunch of polka dots to sell to my customers. Instead of doing that, pay attention to what's selling, what is getting high conversion rates, what is slowing down because you're sizing out of it and you don't have enough of it, and replenish really quickly and do iterations of those best sellers really quickly. So being very responsive to your customer base in a demand instead of a supply push, that is super relevant to the question of how do you create a higher LTV from these customers.
Awesome. Andreas, I think you're going to get the last word here, unless Fies has anything else to add.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I'll add is actually...
Andreas, I'll have you go first, and then Fies, I'll have you go.
Okay.
I think it's a very, very good question. Let me rephrase it, because ultimately the question is, do we make good new customers or do we acquire them? And I think it's highly overrated to think that marketing will make a good customer from a bad one. So ultimately, it's our job to identify people who have certain attributes and will be good customers in their lifetime because they have a good income, whatever, they're inclined to buy products from my company. But it's I feel unrealistic generally to acquire somebody and then throw ads at that person and make him or her a good customer. And this is what many people seem to believe, and it rarely actually works out. So I think we have to focus ourselves on identifying the right people and then doing a decent job, having a good pricing, good value proposition to keep them.
Fies, you get the last word.
Yeah, I think Andreas did a great job explaining that. And I think that's a really important question that Kevin just brought up, is how do you move people between the buckets? And from a product perspective, we actually launched a product back in February of this year, which is available to all advertisers now, which gives a breakdown of your high, your medium, and your one-time purchasers, and shows you how many people you've acquired over time, as well as what their attributes are from an audience perspective. And I think, translating those insights that you're able to see from your marketing systems today, particularly this particular product I was referring to, you could take that back to really go after and feed the system in a way that is automated and in a way that you could really go after those new user acquisition strategies. But that is something I wanted to call out, but I think it's also a very important question to think about.
All right. And with that, we're going to call it a day. Folks, thank you so much for those great questions to our great panelists. I just want to thank our speaker, Tracy Inglis. She's the former president and CMO at RTW Retail Winds and Textile Fashion Group. Leander Blumenthal was on earlier. He's an account executive with Google. He was sharing the stage with Irene Kögl, the head of global digital marketing at Crealytics. Faiz Ahmed, thank you. You're the global product lead of search at Google. And finally, Andreas Reifen, founder and CEO at Crealytics. And I want to thank Crealytics for sponsoring today's webinar. Don't forget to download the slides and the white paper that Crealytics provided. Great ROAS, terrible results, the case for CLV-centric advertising. And finally, thanks to you, our audience, for taking the time to join us today. We appreciate your continued interest and support. Stay safe, and we'll see you at the next CommerceNext Virtual Summit on July 28th and 29th. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.